What is up, everyone? Corn O'Keefe back yet again, and as the title implies, I'm bringing you another versus battle, folks. But today, I'm not alone. Just like with Emperor Palpatine, Sheev himself versus Chuck, I had Benjamin, right? That was my co-host for that episode. Now I have a new co-host for this versus battle. But before he introduces himself, that's right, folks, we're bringing you Lucifer from Supernatural versus Spawn, specifically Hell King Spawn from Image Comics. And without further ado, I'll let this badass introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Combat Lightning, and I would like to thank Corin for, for, allowing me to be the co-host of today's matchup. And I will be the one to represent and Hell King Spawn and Corin will be the one to represent Lucifer from the Supernatural series.
Precisely. Now, the stipulations, conditions, scenarios, whatever you want to say to yourselves out there, whoever's watching, those are going to be simply this. Scenario one, we will talk about how this fight would possibly go down more often than not in an equal stats and hacks situation. We will both give 3 hacks each for our characters. Now, after this scenario is finished, we will move on down the line to the second scenario. And the second scenario will include unequal stats and hacks. And in that scenario, we will go over some AP scaling for both characters, speed scaling, etc., etc. So, with that being said, I'm going to hand the mic over to Combat, and he's going to give you a brief backstory of Spawn himself. Then he's going to hand the mic back over to me, and I'll give you the same for Lucifer from Supernatural. After that, I'll pass the mic back to Combat. He'll give his first win con, and we'll take it from there. We'll go back and forth. So here you go.
Thank you for passing the mic, Corin. Now, to elaborate on Spawn's backstory, when he was alive, like Spawn, who as a human was once known as Al Simmons. I mean, he was a trained military assassin that rose through the ranks of the military and became a lieutenant colonel. Well, yeah, once he once he snuck in a little too deep into questioning the military's orders on him, and that he was betrayed on a mission by his best friend Chapel. This, in return, sent Al Simmons to hell and made a deal with a devil known as Malbolgia. So, and in return, he would become a general for his army in order to see his beloved wife Wanda one last time. This did not go according to plan, and this is what resulted in Spawn, in the creation of Spawn, or to be more precise, or to be more precise, a hellspawn. Now, much later, throughout the comics, Spawn eventually defeated Malebolgia, and far later down the line, eventually became the King of Hell. Now, with that out of the way, I'm gonna be giving the mic back to Corin, so he could go over Lucifer's backstory.
Right on, Combat. Much appreciated, my friend. So, moving on to Lucifer's backstory. Lucifer is God's second archangel, which means he's the younger brother of the archangel known as Michael and the older brother of the archangels known as Gabriel and Raphael. Now, we actually do know Lucifer is, or at least was, God's favorite celestial, his favorite archangel. And for those of you who don't remember, who might not be aware, God, in this context, I'm referring to Chuck. I made a video on him. Check that out. I also made a video going over, or I should say, introducing you badasses to the supernatural cosmology. But this video is about Lucifer, so let's stay on track. But go check those videos out. Now, staying focused on the second archangel, Lucifer would eventually become jealous and rebel against God and heaven. Why? Because eventually God wanted all of the angels, including the archangels, to bow to humanity. Lucifer was a little jealous, you could say, to say the least. He thought humanity was flawed, murder, murderers, scumbags, etc., etc. And something that fueled his hatred more for humanity and really spread the fire around tremendously was the mark of Cain. Now, Lucifer was eventually cast into hell. He was cast out of heaven, sent to hell by God and Michael. In season 5, he is finally back. Well, technically at the end of season 4, he's released from his cage. But in season 5, that's his big arc. He's the main antagonist. The Apocalypse Saga, so to speak. That's what season 1 through 5 really just works up to. Season 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 5 really works up to that. We get the whole shebang. The 4 horsemen, all of it. Spoiler alert, big time on that one for those who haven't seen Supernatural or made it to that season yet. With that being said, though, Lucifer was ultimately put back in his cage because Sam has chatty willpower, supernatural willpower to be precise, and Chuck and Sam are, or Dean and Sam are Chuck's favorite. But again, this is about Lucifer. So Lucifer, he was put back in the cage. He would come back in season 7 and 11 as a secondary antagonist. And that's going to pretty much sum up Lucifer from Supernatural for you in terms of just a little sum up, little brief backstory, history lesson, so to speak, you could say, for you badasses. With that out of the way, I'm going to give the mic back to Combat Lightning, and he's going to go ahead and put Spawn's first WinCon on the table, and we'll see how that goes.
Thank you, Corin. Now, as for Spawn's first WinCon, as you know, as the first thing, as his first win con would be to attack Lucifer for not just on a physical level, but on a spiritual and mental level as well. Thanks to the energy dwelling in him and known as necroplasm, um, which this which Spawn has naturally been able to interact and even sense spirits, since peace, and his necroplasm allows him to mentally to put those in a mental torment. And
Oh, that's very interesting. So, at the end of the day, this is a mixture of physical attacks, or a physical attack, a mental attack, and spiritual. All right. So, if you don't mind, I'll go ahead and move on to a resistance and a counter that Lucifer has, if that's okay with you.
yeah, that's fine.
Alrighty. So, directly for the soul part right off the bat, Lucifer actually lacks a soul. He predates the creation of souls. Therefore, he would be completely immune to the soul part of this attack, to the soul aspect of it, as there's no soul to manipulate or attack. For the mental part, well, even lesser angels, and when I say lesser, I mean beneath archangels, have demonstrated resistance or even some pseudo immunity to multiple types of mind manipulation, mind tactics, mental torture, etc., etc. And for the physical part, well, I would say that really wouldn't do much if it's just standard conventional physical attacks, as those virtually don't do anything, or just blatantly don't do anything at all to Lucifer, and his true nature itself is non corporal. It's actually something different than a soul. As mentioned, he doesn't have one. So I would say just basic physical attacks, the soul attacks, and mental attacks really won't do much, if anything at all, in this situation against Lucifer. What would you say?
I would say I would agree to that.
Alrighty. So do you mind if I move on to Lucifer's first win con?
No, I don't mind at all.
Cool. So the first win con I'll put on the table for Lucy. Lucy, I'm home. Yes, Lucifer is going to be, what does, or I should just go ahead and say subatomic annihilation. Archangels have the capability to rip you apart on a subatomic level. So it's essentially matter manipulation on a subatomic level with a snap of his fingers. Does Spawn have anything to get around this?
So to that, I would say yes. Now, while Spawn hasn't directly fought against something that destroys on a subatomic level, he has he has been affected by something far greater, which was Angela's lance. Now, this lance, when it comes in contact with hellspawns like him completely erases existence entirely. Now, Spawn's regeneration for this was so great that it allowed him to even come back from that.
It's actually very impressive in its own right. And I would say it does suggest he would be able to reform back if or after he gets ripped apart on a subatomic level. If he's able to come back and regenerate from something that erases your existence entirely, then I don't think it would be a stretch to say he'd be able to recover from subatomic destruction. Good stuff. So you want to move on to Spawn's second win con?
Yes. Now, for the second win con that I believe Spawn would demonstrate on the table is that he would unleash his chains to wrap around Lucifer's body, and send through his energy waves that would annihilate Lucifer, and that would completely destroy Lucifer's atoms. This has been shown when he was in an encounter against these vampires that were after him. And it was said that the only way to permanently destroy them was to completely destroy their own atoms, which is what Spawn did. And these vampires weren't able to come back after that.
That's very intriguing indeed. So there's a few things to take into consideration when it comes to Lucifer getting around this. One is he can simply teleport out of the way, right? So, for example, if Spawn goes to throw the chains, Lucifer could just teleport at that moment, or if, when the chains get wrapped around him, if it comes to that, let's just say like that is a possibility, then he could teleport from there. And for the, let's just say he does get hit with this like atomic attack, this atomic level. Well, for one, as I mentioned, his true nature is non corporal. And for two, even if this were to affect his vessel, which that leads me to this, I don't think it will have that much effect considering even somebody like Crowley, a the king of the crossroads, formerly king of the crossroads, he became king of hell, etc., etc. But Crowley, even as king of hell, was inferior to somebody like Castiel. This is important because Crowley is capable of ripping you apart atom by atom. He's capable of doing just that. And again, he's inferior to an angel who's far inferior, very inferior to Lucifer. So I would say if it even came down to him getting hit, which is a little possible, but I do think the teleportation helps. But if he did get hit, I would say he would be okay. What would you say?
I would agree to that.
Awesome. So do you mind if I go on to Lucifer's second win con?
Not at all.
Alrighty then. For Lucifer's second win con, he's going to use sleep manipulation. So how this works is he can either touch you and you'll just immediately go to sleep, or he can just simply say sleep and snap his finger. So there's more than one way he can go about it. Bottom line is he's going to be attempting to utilize sleep manip on Spawn. You'll be asleep. You will not be able to continue the battle. So what would you say to that?
So I would say that while Spawn does not have a direct resistance to this, there is also another scenario to register is that his own sentient symbiote will come into being and just fight the battle because its entire purpose is to protect the host.
See, do you want to elaborate on that a little more?
So so whenever Spawn is too tired to do any of his activities, and whether it's even for something even regular or even fighting for that matter, the symbiote would take over, that, and would just get to fight in Spawn's place, and it would just be something to react on the pure instinct.
Oh, so essentially, when Lucifer put Spawn to sleep, like as in Al Simmons or Al himself, then the symbiote itself will take control. And even if Al is asleep, the symbiote will be able to continue the battle for Al. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it has even helped him in battles as well.
Well, that in itself is definitely interesting and something to consider. But the question is, since he is now part of the battle, does this symbiote have an answer for Lucifer putting it to sleep?
From last, as what I remembered, no, I do not think that the symbiote has a counter to getting put to sleep.
Right? Well, with that being said, even though this is a win condition, we'll keep it on the table. And to keep things a little interesting, we'll see what Spawn's third win con would be.
So the final win con that Spawn would present on the table is that he would he would absorb Lucifer's evil around him, and he would send this evil in the form of dark beasts, and those dark beasts would assault Lucifer, or that that it would force him to encounter that it would force him to face all the evils that he's been surrounded by and the ones that he's even committed to the point that it would force him to commit suicide. That is of course if there is some sort of evil in Lucifer.
Well, that is an interesting thing to bring up. And while it could be argued what Lucifer does isn't inherently what some may consider to be evil, you could argue against that even. But to keep things a little simple, I will ask this, just a simple question. So you say it would surround Spawn, or it would surround Lucifer, and then it would start to work, right?
Yes.
Well, would you say it's fair to assert that Lucifer's teleportation would still help him once this surrounds him in order to actually teleport behind Spawn and utilize the sleep hacks win con? Would you say that's fair to say?
Yes, I would say that it is fair, if Lucifer would have the time to be able to teleport, like before the creatures even do surround him.
Righty? Because I do think it is possible that this could work. I do think it's definitely possible, but with the stuff Lucifer has as well, it's also, in my opinion, more possible. It's more likely that Lucifer in this situation would have the advantage. Spawn definitely has a potential win con, something that could possibly affect Lucifer and help Spawn take victory. But I do think, thanks to the teleportation and the sleep hacks, I do, or I would say, Lucifer does have a more likely possibility, the more likely possibility, you could say, in this situation. What would you say to that?
Yes, I would agree to that as well.
All right. So, with all of that being said, we'll go ahead and move on down the line and talk about some AP and speed scaling for the second scenario of unequal stats and hacks. So, I'll go ahead and let Combat give you the AP and speed of Hell King Spawn, some ranges, etc., etc.
Yes, so to start off with, Hell King Spawn, his attack potency would range from around Uni Plus to low multi. Now, the reason for this is because as I said before, he became the King of Hell. This is important as as he slayed his master Malebolgia, and Malebolgia was the strongest, one of the strongest rulers of Hell that was able to take control completely of the 12 circles. Now, why is it now? The reason for why this would be important is that Hell on its own has been said that it is a higher form of existence, that it is a realm beyond the one that is a realm beyond just the mortal plane, and it transcends all categories of thought. And the impressive thing about this is that each 12 of these is a, is a universe on its own that is infinite in size. Now, as for the Uni Plus range, since he took over Malebolgia's throne, and his attack potency would just make him become drastically more powerful, full as once he became the King of Hell, each time his heart kept beating, it would just only make him 100 times more powerful. And as for the low multi ranges, as I said before, or there are 12 of them that are infinite size, which Malebolgia which Malebolgia had complete control over and was even regarded as like the strongest ruler of all those circles. And Spawn was able to beat him, was even able to beat him, which not only that, but his own scream alone shook the timbers of creation. Now, as for the context of that, and that's only referring to all the circles in hell. I would say that would be about it for response attack potency. Now I'm gonna hand the mic back to Corin so he can go over Lucifer's AP.
Alrighty. Awesome. So for starters, archangels in general are God's most fierce creations. They're absolute. Everything below them, whether it's monsters, demons, pagan gods, leviathans, and other angels, they're all just atoms in comparison. This is insane because there's actually a couple pagan gods in Supernatural that are capable of ravaging galaxies, and it was actually directly stated that they consumed half of their own universe. So, right off the bat, even pagan gods that are capable of ravaging galaxies and consuming half of a universe are considered atoms compared to archangels. Even the weakest of archangels, which still isn't weak by any stretch of the word or imagination. Now, that can easily range anywhere from multi-galaxy plus or even get into the lower ranges of universal. However, they have other scaling, and the archangels themselves have feats that put them above multi-galaxy or even universal. So Gabriel, the younger brother of Lucifer, who's also weaker than Lucifer in terms of raw power, he created a parallel universe, and this parallel universe in itself contained over 300 other TV show realities. He later dissolved this structure with a mere thought. That's insane because the difference between a punch and a thought is over 1,000 times difference in itself. That's something to consider. And as I mentioned, Lucifer is superior to Gabriel, even in a non perfect vessel. What do I mean by non perfect? Well, Lucifer and Michael have perfect vessels. Spoiler alert again, Sam and Dean are the perfect vessels. Sam is Lucifer's perfect vessel, Dean is Michael's. And when they are in their perfect vessels, they can utilize their full power without any drawbacks, any limitations, etc., etc. That means even while being limited to some degree, Lucifer is still superior to his little brother who can casually create parallel universes that contain over 300 other TV show realities inside of it and dissolve it with a thought. Now, this in itself can easily range from low multiversal, possibly multiversal, depending on how you go about it. If you want to consider the 1,000 times difference between a punch and a thought, etc., etc. Stuff like that. You can argue that could get it to multiversal. It's at least low multi, and even if you really want to downplay it to the extreme, you really couldn't get it any lower than universal. And he, again, dissolved this at the very worst, bare minimum. He dissolved this universe with a thought, which would still be far above baseline universal regardless. So, with that being said, I think you get the gist of the ranges for the archangels, mainly Lucifer and Supernatural. I'm going to hand the mic back to Combat. He's going to give some speed ranges for Spawn, and then I'm going to do the same for Lucifer. There you go.
Thank you, Corin. Now, to go over the speed ranges for Spawn, his speed will range from infinite to inaccessible. Now, the reasons for these is for infinite, Spawn, even before he became the King of Hell, traveled down to one of the circles of hell that was described being so pitch black and dark that no light has ever shined in it, and this circle was even described to be a patch of infinity, and the circle as well is also said to be infinite as well. Well, which Spawn has complete control over. And for the inaccessible, so so in one of the issues when Spawn wasted too much necroplasmic energy, he was sent down to hell. Hell was so fast to the point that it broke all concept of time in itself. And not only that, but even Malebolgia, one of the Hell Lords, was able to easily send him back in time. No, let me correct myself. Was able to send him back from Hell to Urk very, very casually as well. And as we mentioned before, Spawn would actually scale to this type of speed. And since my speed range scaling is over, I would like to give the mic back to Corin so he can go over Lucifer's speed.
Alrighty. Starting off with Lucifer's speed, the speed of Lucifer. One thing to take into consideration is even a lesser angel. I believe it was Zachariah, but nonetheless, an angel who is beneath archangels stated something along the lines that he would spread a character's body across the universe, essentially. It was something very similar to that, something along those lines. So, that in itself, especially if this was to be performed by a lesser angel, this can get you to easily massively faster than light speeds, massively faster than light plus, easily in that ballpark, billions, trillions, possibly even quadrillions, if not a little more, times the speed of light. So that's one thing to consider. Some other things to consider is heaven in itself is implied, heavily implied, and suggested to be a higher plane of existence. It's said to be ageless, holy. It's implied to be, timeless in that sense. And Bobby Singer in season 15 said time, it's different in heaven. But keep in mind, that's a mortal soul, right? From his perspective, comparing it to time, like linear time on Earth. So if we do go with the idea heaven is timeless, and you go with the inaccessible speed definition on character stats and profile, then you could make an argument that angels and archangels, including Lucifer, possibly have inaccessible speed. If you believe heaven is timeless, argue it's this timeless realm, this ageless realm, and that these angels just naturally move around there, they can actually exist there, it's like a natural habitat for them. And obviously Lucifer he's just far faster than any other angel below him. So that's something else to take into consideration. You can also argue heaven is, or I should say, let me correct myself there. Moving around in heaven could potentially give you immeasurable speed due to how it is beyond the flow of linear time within the physical universe. Again, throwing it out there as an argument. Something else to take into consideration is archangels are completely immune to time hacks. They're completely immune to it. And they are capable of time traveling. Now, you could definitely argue that in itself is more of an inherent ability, but again, still something to consider for immeasurable speed. A couple things to consider. At the end of the day, you can argue Lucifer can reach anywhere from massively faster than light, inaccessible, and immeasurable speed. And to add on one more thing for the MFTL plus scaling is the pagan gods I mentioned that ravaged galaxies and consumed half their universe. Well, if you take the speed it would require to accomplish that from them, then Lucifer would upscale from that as well. So yeah, anywhere from MFTL plus, possibly far higher, inaccessible, maybe immeasurable. So with that out of the way, I'll hand the mic over to Combat and get some of his thoughts on the ranges for these characters. Let's see what he really thinks.
So, giving my thoughts, with the AP ranges for both of the characters, I would say that Lucifer, more often than not, would be superior to Hell King Spawn, even after all that I've explained. Which the vast difference would be just enough for a one shot. However, as we mentioned over with the hexes, Lucifer, which just a sleep hex, with the sleep hex alone, if there's not more to counteract spawns wouldn't just need brute strength to clear the victory. Now, as for the speed ranges, it is possible to say that that they do seem similar In a sense, but it is also just as possible to say that Lucifer might have immeasurable speed scaling as well. Well, going over everything that Corin explained. Now, if the both of them do get to range at the accessible, well, they would have the same level of speed. However, that wouldn't really be helping Spawn in the long run, since because of Lucifer's drastically superior fighting power. And if we could even just go over with the immeasurable, I never went anything over on saying that Spawn has immeasurable speed. So I would say that Lucifer takes victory more often than not. Now, I'm gonna give the mic back to Corin and see what he thinks of this.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So, for my final thoughts, you could say it really does depend on the route that you go. For me, I would say if we go the inaccessible speed route, it seems to me that Spawn's inaccessible speed argument, or rather, I was going to say it seems like his inaccessible speed argument holds a little more weight. But what I should say is Combat mentioned a multiplier for Spawn, and yes, Lucifer would have a good amount of upscaling, but if we do take that multiplier into account, I'm not sure if it's only for AP or speed only, then that would definitely boost Spawn speed up tremendously within a short amount of time. Does that just go for strength or speed, Combat? Can you clarify?
It goes over for both power and speed.
All right. Well, that is definitely something to consider if they're in the same range of speed, or even if they're both in finite. Let's say they're both like in a finite range, hypothetically speaking, like Spawn has that huge multiplier advantage that he can boost himself with within a very short amount of time. And if you just go with the most lowest end, borderline just downplay, in my humble opinion, for the AP of Lucifer, and just say he's multi galaxy plus, universal, then Spawn would have a big AP advantage, and that could definitely be problematic for Lucifer in that regard. Same with speed. And the potential win con that we went over earlier for Spawn could come into play even more in this situation. However, if we do go with the other routes for Lucifer and say he's at least low multi, possibly full on multiversal, then he would have a pretty big AP advantage over Spawn, especially starting off, and especially with the Uni Plus route for Spawn. It would be very hard for him to catch up before getting one shot. It is a quick amp, but that also is a huge, huge gap starting off. And with Lucifer's teleportation capabilities and his hacks, like his sleep hacks, I do think that would be very problematic for Spawn in that situation. Now, with that being said, Spawn has low multiversal arguments himself. And again, similar to Lucifer, you could argue with the multipliers that they make up for other 4D structures, they make up for the gaps. So you could actually argue with these multipliers, Spawn could definitely reach, or at least potentially reach, Lucifer's level within a short amount of time. Lucifer would start off more powerful in the low multi range. That's for sure. Obviously, over 300 versus 12 starting off. Lucifer, or I should say Gabriel, also has the over 1,000 times multiplier you can take into consideration. So in the low multi one, Spawn does have a chance to catch up. And if he does start off faster, he could play his cards right. He could catch up in AP. You could argue with the multiplier, or you definitely could argue against the multiplier making up for these inaccessible, these 4D gaps, these universes, so to speak. But you could argue either way. Just throwing it out there. I want to be fair to everybody. Both of them have these type of arguments with the multipliers, and they could both be argued against. With that being said, I do favor Lucifer in this situation more often than not as well. He's starting off more powerful. His teleportation can definitely help. And his sleep hacks is deadly, very deadly in this situation for Spawn. And Spawn's hacks, again, not selling him short. He does have a possible way to win. And if he does have the speed X starting off, he could work with that. He could catch up in AP. So both have arguments. It's possible for both to win, in my opinion. But I would lean towards Lucifer more often than not in this situation. And obviously, if we go with lower routes for Lucifer, in terms of AP especially, then I would say that Spawn has an even higher chance of winning in those routes. So overall, I would say this is actually a pretty interesting matchup. Both have arguments. Both have pretty good ranges. Both have hacks on the table. But my final thoughts would be yes. I would say Lucifer takes victory more often than not. Any final words, Combat?
No, well, for my final words, but I would just like to say that it's it's an honor to collab with you like this, and that this podcast was really fun to go over with both of these great characters.
Awesome. And it was awesome to have you on the channel. Anyways, hope y'all enjoyed this video for what it actually was. Have a blessed day, folks. Peace.